Have you ever viewed life like it's just a series of rooms you're passing through and you're just waiting for the one with the open window? That was me back in Boston, staring at a stack of bills that looked like a mountain range I couldn't climb. I'm Arthur Miller, just a guy who used to think the scariest thing in the world was a collection agency calling at 8 a.m. But then I took the contract in the Pacific Northwest. Why did I trade the city for the deep woods of the Olympic Peninsula in the dead of winter? Why did the hiring manager look me in the eye and ask if I was comfortable with total isolation? And more importantly, why did the previous guard leave his watch in the middle of a shift, leaving the gate wide open and his car idling in the snow? I took the job because the pay was the triple the standard rate for night security. The site was an abandoned pulp mill tucked away near the Haugen Forest. It was a sprawling skeleton of rusted steel and rotted cedar, surrounded by trees so thick they seemed to swallow the light. It was January, and the sun in Washington is a rare, cold guest. When it did show up, it just made the shadows of the Douglas firs look longer and sharper, like teeth. My first week was nothing but silence and the smell of damp earth. I spent my nights walking the perimeter with a heavy-duty mag light and the Mossberg 500 slung over my shoulder. Standard issue for wildlife protection, they said. To keep my mind sharp, I'd think about recipes. Back home, I loved to cook. I'd spent hours perfecting a bolognese or a clam chowder. Out there, in that little guard shack, I just simmer canned chili on a hot plate, pretending the bubbling sound was someone talking to me. On the seventh night, the sunny winter streak ended. A heavy mist rolled in, thick as wool. Around 3 a.m., I heard it for the first time. It wasn't a growl and it wasn't a howl. It was a whistle. High-pitched, melodic, and completely out of place in a forest where every bird was huddled in a nest somewhere. I stopped near the old loading dock, my breath blooming in the air like smoke. I clicked off my light. You know how they say the woods go quiet when a predator is near? This was different. The woods didn't go quiet. They went dead. Then came the wood knocks. Hard, heavy impacts against the trunks of the trees, echoing from two different directions. Something was communicating. I felt a prickle at the base of my scalp, that ancient lizard brain alarm telling me I was being watched. I panned my light toward the tree line, and for a split second, the beam hit two amber discs about 8 feet off the ground. They didn't reflect like a deer's eyes. They glowed with a dull internal heat. Then they blinked and vanished. I didn't sleep that morning. I just sat in the shack, clutching a lukewarm coffee, wondering what kind of animal stands 8 feet tall and whistles like a man. The next few days felt like living inside a held breath. The sun stayed hidden behind a ceiling of slate-gray clouds, and the air turned brittle, the kind of cold that makes the wood of the old mill pop and groan like it's being tortured. I found myself checking the locks on the guard shack tree 4 times an hour. Why was I still there? Was the money really worth the feeling of being a fly in a web? And what was that smell? A cloying, heavy stench of wet dog mixed with something rotting, like a carcass left in a stagnant pond? I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just a bear that hadn't hibernated properly, or maybe a rogue elk. But bears don't throw rocks. On the 10th night, a stone the size of a grapefruit slammed into the corrugated metal roof of the shack with the force of a gunshot. I jumped so hard I spilled my stew across the desk. I grabbed the Mossberg, my heart hammering a rhythm against my ribs that I could feel in my throat. I stepped out onto the porch, the cold air hitting me like a physical blow. "Who's there?" I yelled. But the forest just ate the sound. I clicked on the maglite, sweeping the perimeter fence. That's when I saw the first print. It was pressed deep into the frozen mud just outside the gate. 5 toes, a narrow heel, and nearly 17 inches long. It wasn't a boot, and it sure as hell wasn't a bear. The weight required to sink a foot that deep into partially frozen ground was staggering. I remember the stories I'd heard in the local diner about the forest people, or the Sooke, tales I'd laughed off as tourist bait. I wasn't laughing now. I heard a rustle in the brush to my left, near the rusted remains of the cheaper house. I swung the light over and caught a glimpse of hair matted dark reddish-brown and thick. It moved with a fluid, bipedal grace that no human could mimic in that terrain. It was huge. Arthur, I'm telling you, it made the industrial machinery look like toys. It didn't run. It simply stepped over a 4-foot fallen log like it was a pebble. Then it stopped. It stood in the shadow of a massive cedar, its silhouette blending into the bark, but I could see the massive breadth of its shoulders. It let out a low, vibrating hum, a sound so deep I felt it in my teeth more than I heard it in my ears. It was an infrasonic warning, a get out, that bypassed my ears and went straight to my nerves. My vision blurred for a second, a wave of nausea washing over me. I retreated into the shack and bolted the door, sliding the heavy iron bar across. I spent the rest of the night in the corner, the shotgun across my lap, watching the door handle and praying for the sun that wouldn't rise for another 4 hours. I realized then that I wasn't guarding the mill from people. I was just the bait in a cage I'd walked into willingly. By the 14th night, the sunny winter days had completely surrendered to a brutal, bone-chilling freeze that turned the slush into jagged glass. I should have left after the humming incident, but the road was a mess of black ice and part of me, that stubborn, desperate part that needed a paycheck, kept saying it was just a territorial animal. But animals don't cut the power. At 1 a.m., the hum of the electric heater died, and the fluorescent lights flickered once before plunging the shack into a suffocating, velvety blackness. In the sudden silence, I heard the sound of metal screaming. Something was outside, and it wasn't just watching anymore. I heard the chain link fence groan and snap, the sound of heavy gauge wire being peeled back like tinfoil. I scrambled for my headlamp, clicking it on just in time to see the window of the shack shatter inward. A rock the size of a bowling ball crashed onto the floor, sending shards of glass flying like shrapnel. Then came the scream, a sound that started as low, guttural roar and climbed into a falsetto shriek that sounded like a woman in agony mixed with a steam whistle. It wasn't a warning anymore, it was a war cry. I grabbed the Mossberg and pushed out the door, knowing that if I stayed trapped in that wooden box, I was a dead man. The mist was so thick I could barely see 5 feet ahead, but I didn't need eyes to feel the pressure in the air. To my right, the heavy steel door of the warehouse, a door that took 2 men to slide open, was hanging off its rollers, bent at a sickening angle. I heard a heavy thump, thump, thump of something sprinting, but the footsteps weren't hitting the ground. They were hitting the roof of the warehouse above me. It was fast, impossibly fast for something that size. "I see you," I screamed, firing a warning shot into the air. The flash of the muzzle blinded me for a second, but in that strobe light moment, I saw it. It was perched on the edge of the roof, looking down at me. It was covered in dark frozen fur, its face a terrifying hybrid of a weathered old man and a powerful ape with a heavy, prominent brow and deep-set, intelligent eyes that burned with a primal fury. It didn't flinch at the sound of the gun. Instead, it bared its teeth, large, square, and yellowed, and let out a spray of hot, foul-smelling breath into the cold air. It leapt. I dived behind the rusted forklift as the creature slammed into the spot where I'd been standing, the impact cracking the concrete floor. The sheer weight of it made the ground vibrate. I scrambled back, leveling the shotgun, my hands shaking so hard the barrel danced in the dark. It stood up to its full height, easily 9 feet tall, blocking out the stars. I realized it wasn't just one. From the darkness of the tree line, 3 more sets of glowing eyes emerged, circling the perimeter of the mill. I was being hunted by a pack, and they had just closed the gate. My heart wasn't just beating. It was a frantic animal trying to claw its way out of my chest. I knew the layout of the mill better than they did, or so I hoped, and I scrambled toward the secondary maintenance tunnel that led to the old boiler room. The lead creature let out a rhythmic huffing sound, and I heard the others begin to move, their heavy footfalls sounding like rhythmic drums against the frozen earth. I reached the heavy iron hatch and threw myself inside, slamming the bolt home just as a massive weight collided with the other side, denting the half-inch steel. Why did they want me dead now, after weeks of just watching? Had I crossed some invisible line, or was the winter hunger finally overriding their caution? I navigated the tunnel by the dim dying light of my headlamp, the air in the crawl space smelling of rust and ancient grease. I emerged into the boiler room, a cavernous space filled with the shadows of dormant machinery that looked like sleeping giants. I knew the back exit led to the gravel pit where the old company truck was parked, a beat-up 1998 Ford with a winch and enough weight to handle the ice. I checked my pockets. The keys were there, cold and jagged against my thigh. I checked the Mossberg. 3 shells left. I wasn't going to win a firefight, but I only needed to win a race. I burst out of the boiler room's side door, the freezing air burning my lungs. The truck was 50 yards away. I saw a shadow detach itself from the side of a fuel tank, a smaller one, maybe 7 feet tall, blocking my path. It lunged with a speed that defied its bulk, reaching out with a hand that looked like a leather glove stretched over a shovel. I didn't think. I just leveled the Mossberg and fired. The buckshot caught it in its shoulder, and it let out a shriek that sounded like a dying violin, reeling back into the darkness. I didn't wait to see if it stayed down. I dove into the truck, fumbling the keys into the ignition. The engine turned over with a sluggish frozen moan. I slammed it into gear just as the windshield shattered. A massive hand, covered in coarse black hair, punched through the safety glass, reaching for my throat. I floored the accelerator, the tire screaming for grip on the gravel before catching. The creature was dragged for a few feet before losing its hold, tumbling into the snow as I tore through the broken gate. I drove for 3 hours without looking at the rearview mirror, not stopping until I saw the neon lights of a gas station in Port Angels. I didn't call the police. What was I going to tell them? That the woods tried to eat me? I left the truck in the lot, caught a bus to Seattle, and was back in Boston 48 hours later. Sometimes, when I'm in my kitchen late at night, I'll hear a branch tap against the window or a distant whistle from the street, and I'll freeze, my hands trembling over the stove. People ask why I don't take security jobs anymore, why I stick to the bright lights of the city. I just tell them I lost my taste for the quiet. But the truth is, I know that out there, in the dark, under the canopy of the pines, something is still whistling, and it remembers exactly how I smell.